we just have 15 minutes before we finish, but we do now have the opportunity to ask our last few questions to the speakers that you may not have had the opportunity earlier. So there they are, all surrounding me. So if you would like to ask, yes.
This question, this question is inspired by the last talk primarily, but I think maybe I'd be interested to hear what wider response is. The last talk presented a very upbeat picture of evolution as almost a march towards increasingly sophisticated, increasingly well-fit systems. And that certainly isn't a view that's held across biology. So, for example, species drive themselves extinct, ecosystems crash, terrible things happen, and that seems to me to be true in the economy as well, in economics. I wondered generally whether the speakers felt that ideas from complexity could change biologists' minds in that respect, and maybe we should be thinking about adaptive processes as value-driven. That seems to be the impression I got from last.
Thank you. Who would like to answer that question? Okay, thank you.
Well, I think it's just worth noting this question about progress, which is what you're talking about is something, there's a very interesting history, was a very popular idea in the 19th century, championed by people like Spencer, and there was a certain Spencerian tone to something like that, Eric. But, became very unpopular. I would actually argue that World War I was a defining event because suddenly people said, wait a minute, all this technology, all this stuff we're making, maybe it's actually not making the world any better, maybe it's actually making it worse. And I think the key to thinking about this question is being very precise about what things are making progress and what things are just going around in circles or randomly fluctuating. And I think from the point of view of SKUs, if you just talk about technology and things that do stuff, the things that do stuff get more complicated, more sophisticated, not monotonically either. It's like entropy, the finite system. But there's a tendency, and you see this equally well in biology. Now saying that that's technological progress, but I don't think it necessarily means the world is getting better or the organisms in it are happier or a long list of other things. And I think, frankly, it's something we don't understand very well. And I think it's a dialogue that needs to be reopened because it became so unpopular, really, from World War I through postmodernism, this has been something that can't be talked about. And major evolutionary biological thinkers like Stephen Jay Gould and Richard Lewontin and lots of other people have spent a lot of time bashing. But I think if one makes the discussion more precise, maybe we can actually start to be a little clearer about what's going on.
Just a brief comment. I agree completely with what Joan was just saying. I wasn't implying that decreasing entropy is necessarily a good or bad thing. I was just noting it has happened in the historical record. And I should also note, one thing that was hidden in those graphs I showed was that it's not a monotonically increasing function. History is full of lots of rises and falls and collapses of societies. And this sort of our recent jag up the SKU curve, who knows what that would be? Could there be a collapse in our level of order?
Now, I actually have 6 questions, so I think we will need to respond quite quickly. And let me tell you, John, the young lady there, you, and final. So that's the order, and that's it.
From the title of your last talk, where does wealth come from? I was hoping to get some sort of clue as to what
I should have made that clear. The answer is simple: evolution. That all wealth is the creation of evolutionary process. Sorry.
I see the biggest problem as world poverty. Are there any clues about how we go about tackling that from complexity from?
No, it's a very good question, and I was being slightly glib, but I do believe that wealth is the result of evolutionary processes, And one of the issues in poverty is in these societies, the evolutionary processes of wealth creation don't work. That this process of creating a diversity of business plans, of business plan selection, and business plan amplification don't work for a variety of institutional reasons, whether they're organized as a hierarchical dictatorship, so the business plans being developed are those that please the big man, or the selection processes are getting distorted in some way in society, or there's no mechanisms for amplification for capital to flow to successful business plans, et cetera. So I think it's a rich topic.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure, but the 500 grams of toothpaste actually increases wealth.
Okay. Sorry, John, but we need as many questions as possible. Yes.
I just wanted to make, having been here the last couple of days, the one thing that I think sort of unifies a lot of these processes, and this is my own bias, is a process of random conflict. And that's when people talk about evolution, they often focus on selection, but there's a whole body of very advanced and successful theory to tackle the neutral theory of population genetics, which is simply the theory of if everybody in this room copies, if we all copy each other at once, what happens? And that could be, we could simply be giving each other 10-pound notes, we could be copying each other's words, we could be copying each other's internet links, what have you, all at the same time. And one of the very elegant predictions of neutral theory is a power law distribution of varying frequencies. So if we're exchanging, if we're copying, if we're doing this behavior, we're naming each other, or copying words, or exchanging, or copying each other's consumer behavior, a neutral theory of population genetics would predict that a certain store would emerge as the power law winner, or a certain word would emerge, or somebody would emerge. You have a Pareto distribution as well. And I just wonder if there's been an exploration of these are the wonderful results, especially by Kimura and Crow and others in population genetics. We go back to the 60s. And if I could just say one more thing, if you're using some of these tools of population genetics, one of the other nifty predictions is, for example, if we're all copying each other's behavior, one of us in the room there will be one behavior which is the ancestor of all others. Always at some time, something will be the common ancestor. And one of the predictions of population genetics theory is that the turnover rate in that common ancestor, the fixated trait, is actually constant. And that has implications for technological evolution or language evolution. And I just wanted to comment because I just found myself that it's such a rich body of theory, and it's actually designed, I think, we're looking at a lot of these problems mathematically.
Thank you. Anyone like to respond? Or shall we go to the next? Okay. Thank you for your comment. Yes, do you want to respond?
I'm sorry, I don't want to. But I just think you have to, relating back to his question, you can do a lot of nice things with neutral theory. I mean, and in fact, the theory I presented today is a sort of a neutral theory, because I'm not worrying about what ultimately sets the barriers that constrain prices and so on. But you're never going to explain any notion of progress, or I think what Eric was talking about this decrease in entropy from that kind of a theory.
Yeah, and I would claim, at least, looking into the work by people like Simon, et cetera, that what they describe is not a neutral process, that this process of deductive tinkering, does have all sorts of bias to it. So, the mathematical tools may be useful, but I think the results in an economic context are likely to be quite different, but we don't know because no one's done the work, at least as far as I know.
Thank you.
My question, I suppose, is to Luke, but I'd also like to hear your other perspectives. To what extent does your work shed light on interdisciplinary communication, discussions, communications, engagement, most importantly, between disciplines, which, as Dr. Eisenstein pointed out, is at the heart of computational research?
Luke?
Well, I do think that basic concepts, basic categories, and then talking about it and representing it, that's the key that we need to, between disciplines, to exchange things and to. So in that sense, I'm more like studying the sort of semiotic processes that are taking place when we do that kind of thing. Now, at the moment, I would say we don't know yet enough about these kind of semiotic processes to really, I think, make a kind of theory that then could be immediately useful. But I surely believe that this is the way we have to go about doing it. Well, yes, I couldn't talk about that, but the reuse by analogy, by metaphor, is a very key driving force of the language evolution. So with respect to some other things that have been said, I would kind of sort of suggest that we shouldn't too much think about this particular model of evolution like showing up in Sims and those kinds of things, because it's only one mechanism, I think. There are others, like to go back to the hunting tribe, you said the anthropologist is writing their business plan. They don't have any, right? So I think that there's a lot that's going on in the world without any business plan, without any schema, and actually the schema is coming after, is a way to kind of institutionalize afterwards what's going on. So this is another topic which I would like to bring up. In the work that we do on language evolution, I think, is also giving new ideas to think about evolution, not just from this, you make a random variation in a schema which then gets translated, but rather the process, how things which are naturally occurring, interactions, are made explicit and then become expressed, and that way become kind of crystallized in the population. And so this is also, I think, what we are doing when we get together, is things which we felt in our own discipline, which we are trying to make explicit. We're trying to show it then with representations that we can give to others, which reinterpret and get new ideas and maybe transform the meanings underneath it. And
actually, I was going to ask if Bob had any comments since...
Nothing additional, no, thank you.
Just one quick follow-on, just comment, because what you said was quite interesting, that language is the schema for human social evolution, whether it's written or not. In pre-writing societies, it's still the schema, and it's very interesting. I know there's a lot of debate on just when language did develop, but there's some people who think that it corresponds with actually an explosion in the number of SKUs of physical artifacts in societies. That about 30,000 years ago, there was this great radiation of physical artifacts, and that may have been tied into the development of language.
Let me toss a thought in, since the two questions that were raised: what does complex systems offer to the less wealthy 99% of the world, and the question of evolution, which surely occurs by other mechanisms than just the refinement of business plans. I think, in fact, big man societies and closed system societies are probably the exception in the developing parts of the world, although we have lots of examples in front of us. Because if you look at the anthropological literature, the biggest changes and the greatest evolutionary growth is seen in simpler societies coming in contact at their borders with the artifacts of a more advanced society. I've had accidental contacts with Eskimos who couldn't be more delighted with the trash left all across the north of Canada by the distant early warning systems in the 50s and 60s, and have simply adapted their techniques to a whole bunch of modern things without changing their social structure particularly. So there are evolutionary processes that you see easily in anthropologists' favorite topics, but I think they occur in all sorts of societies as they get a fraction of the SKUs of the developed world dropped in their laps and figure out entirely different things to do with them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very rich menu. Agenda was very stimulating indeed. I was simply to ask this question, but I will ask you, Eric. you cover such a lot of ground, and yet we want you to look at certain issues. The thing that I would gather from my earlier question, I'd like to look at was politics. We live in political economies and not in economics, and yet we didn't mention politics at all. And the order you were talking about was always market order rather than political order, but there could be a debate. We could have now politics always comes first, and you can't have economic order and political order. Is that something which we generally feel is important? I know it to be absolutely important. Is there anything that you can do to address that element?
Okay. Before you answer, can I ask that we take the last two questions and then we can answer, address all three, because we're running out of time. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Sorry, I've got a fairly soft voice, so I'll use the mic. But really, it's sort of following on from that last thought. The area I work in is looking at conflict, which is an area we haven't really discussed here. Kind of looking into the future, 15 to 20 years ahead, looking at the kind of conflicts that might arise in human society, trying to model them so as to give advice on, the way forward for the UK Ministry of Defence, for example, or to prevent conflict, which is the ultimate art, if you like, of the game. But and increasingly we're finding that modeling these as agent-based systems and also trying to develop a theory based on some of the kind of scaling effects that we've seen here, gives you some insight. For example, it's well known that if you plot the frequency of wars against the size of wars, then you get on a log-log plot, it's a really nice straight line. Nobody knows, in nature it says both for earthquakes and wars you get power law behavior, and such an elegant relationship should have an elegant explanation, but nobody knows what it is. That was nature's take about a year ago, and we're still working the problem, but we know we're right at the start of things. What I'd really like to get a view on is how we combine the theory of scaling systems with the kind of mandrolic or art approach of developing agent models together, so we get more insight into the whole problem.
Thank you very much. And the last one, and then we'll answer all of them together. If you like to, yes.
My question related to the paper by Blind Farmer on the stock market, and I was struck by his revelation that there seem to be a very large number of trading strategies employed, and by implication a large number of those are successful. And I simply wondered, it would seem to be almost counterintuitive that there could be a large number of competing trading strategies which are all successful. And I wondered, first of all, that's true. Secondly, could you offer an explanation or comment?
Okay, so if we can answer some of those.
You want to go in reverse order?
Yes. Okay.
Well, I think it's actually a really hard question to characterize the diversity. I mean, I think it's the diversity of financial strategies is to me a very interesting thing. When I, went to Wall Street and started walking around and talking to people, which is how I learned about markets, I was struck at the diversity of opinions and the fact that I could walk into institution A and have some guy, in fact, within institution A, I could find a guy that would tell me the only way to do it is like this, and then I could walk up 3 floors and find a guy in the same institution who'd say the only way to do it is not this. And so I think I think there are a diversity of successful strategies, but compared with the space of all possible strategies, the space of successful strategies is very small, which I think may relate back to the remark earlier about entropy. There's a lot of ways to do things wrong, and there may be more than one way to do things right, but there aren't a whole lot of ways to do things right. But I think it's a fascinating thing to understand why that's true, and in particular, I do believe in market efficiency, and that ultimately it's a puzzle to explain why these things can coexist. It certainly has to do with the fact that the environment is highly complex, that the solutions that people come up with in secrecy, I should add, tend to be diverse in the sense that maybe 2 people happen to really do exactly the same thing, but I don't think that's common that people really do exactly the same thing. So but you know, the basic answer is I think this is a really interesting area that we don't understand very well. But I want to just make a quick comment about your question about scaling laws and conflict. I think one of the really fascinating questions is, first of all, to explain these scaling laws. And ultimately, are they really robust, stochastic things that we have a hard time imagining a system that could overcome? I mean, another great example is the power law distribution of wealth, where what we see is that you seem to be able to change the exponent of the distribution, but no society, I mean, you never see a distribution of wealth that doesn't at least look approximately like a power law. So there must be some very robust explanation of this. But then secondly, you'd like to understand how to engineer it. And a guess about, I mean, as a society, it's more desirable to have a really large exponent that I mean, at least I believe, that creates a more egalitarian distribution of wealth. And can you change the rules to make that distribution be, well, more egalitarian? And similarly with wars, even more interesting question, I mean, can we actually change that distribution, you know, that I guess it was Richardson or somebody historically observed, can we actually change the distribution? I doubt we can get rid of the power law, but maybe we can make it steeper.
Thank you very much. We're running out of time, so anyone who hasn't perhaps spoken and would like to respond to the questions on conflict, on politics, or whatever.
Elimination of war.
Yeah.
On the elimination of war, no, I don't know how to eliminate war, but I mean as far as sort of the natural occurrence of political issues and things like these, for example, there's a natural sort of seeming inability of something that would be sort of agent-based to represent political bodies. I mean, unless you represent an entire political body as an agent, it's pretty hard to understand how this thing is going to form coalitions that would have political characteristics, right? I mean, it doesn't, but the reality is that in situations where you have agents that are sharing or competing for resources and you are having them adapt to those things, you immediately wind up, and if they have lots of parameters, which they tend to do, then you immediately wind up with the problem, for example, in selection of things that you're going to train and adapt, because you can't, I mean, if you everything is always changing in these, at least in the calculations, and the calculations are unstable, and so you have to do things. So well, no, so what happens is, that isn't what I said. What I'm saying is that when you pick or imply, when you partition the agents into categories, possible categories that you can form, because you have lots and lots of them, because there's so many, then you can wind up with agents being on one side of an issue if you partition them in one direction, the exact same agent being on the other side of an issue if they do not. And so you can wind up with things, in these learning processes and in the way that you deal with them that look a lot like voting paradoxes, that look a lot like very interesting sorts of relationships that can cause these simulations to move in a variety of different directions. For example, in things as simple as what amounts to constituency design. So depending on how you develop who you assign to what partition for the criteria of how you feed them information and allow them to adapt, you can have things, simple things like the choice of whether you're going to, I don't know, I mean, I'm making things up, but widen a freeway or to achieve the same end, change local streets, which have different winners and losers and different people paying and different sorts of effects, which would in the real world result in political conflict. I mean, it's not going to start a war, but it's classical sort of, you know, low-level political conflict. You can find very interesting issues in what I would call, you know, the definition of constituency design, even though the underlying simulation is, you know, an agent definition is running. So I think the elements of being able to involve political-like issues in the evaluation and the use of these kinds of things is a very real possibility. It's a very interesting one, and I think it's almost completely unexplored, and it ought to be explored. I think it's a really interesting thing to do. Well, it's the most important thing to you, but it's a very, but it is very interesting. Yeah, sure. But it is very interesting. It doesn't produce an outcome. I mean, these things don't produce an outcome. It depends on how you look at them, what outcome they produce. That's a very interesting thing.
Thank you very much. No, I can't, I'm afraid I can't take any more questions. What I would like to do now is a few thank yous. First of all, I would like to thank all our speakers, and if you would join me, please, to thank all our speakers again. Because I think what we had was the most incredibly rich bouquet over the past 2 days. I would also like to thank my co-sponsors. Thank you very much indeed, Bob, on behalf of the Santa Fe Institute. Thank you very much, Ralph. I must also thank Professor Mario Rossetti, who is the coordinator of Existence. He was unable to be with us today for very serious reasons, but I would like to thank him in his absence. In addition, I would like to thank Slavica Savic, who is an administrator. Without her, this would not have taken place. So thank you, Slavica, very much. And your helpers, and also all our stewards who helped us so much to set it up. I'd like to thank Melissa Nolas. Melissa, can you just come out of your cubbyhole? She has been doing all the videotaping for the past 2 days. Jeff Higgs, our rapporteur, who will produce our written report, and our 2 artists, Matteo Willis and Julian Burton. But last and not least, I would like to thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, because without your participation and your active response, again, this would not have been the success that I think we will all agree it has been. Thank you very, very much indeed.
I guess we shouldn't forget one thing. We should thank Eve Middleton Kelly, because she was really very helpful in this